here today on a motion for relief from judgment filed by Mr. Wershey. As both parties know, parties are not...
Being in prison the last 29 years is like being dead.
Now, based on my reading of...
The only connection I have to the free world is this telephone. You see your kids grow up, but you have no part of anything. It's like living in the ultimate purgatory.
The case law over the last decade has demanded that we treat juveniles constitutionally different than adults. That difference requires us to consider the defendant's age at the time of crime.
Sitting here in front of the judge, scared as hell. I know this is the best chance at getting my life back. And I know everything rides on what this judge is about to say. Everyone knows who I am, but no one knows the real reason I'm in here.
The teenage drug dealer nicknamed White Boy Rick was busted at age 17 and has served 28 years behind bars, the longest ever in Michigan for a nonviolent juvenile.
You're not going to convince any judge in this day and age that somebody deserves life for selling drugs.
How many of you have heard about the drug problem in our schools?
The only thing that I legitimately remember about the war on drugs in the 80s when I was a child was seeing Nancy Reagan on Different Strokes telling, Gary Coleman, just say no.
All drugs are dumb.
He was moving kilos, and when you're 17 years old and you're moving kilos, you're at a status of drug dealer that most 17-year-olds don't reach.
And I'll tell you from what I can see as a judge now, the war on drugs is over and drugs won.
Young Boys Incorporated originally was the gang that really institutionalized and industrialized the distribution of heroin. Detroit's heroin market gave way to cocaine, which quickly gave way to crack cocaine.
Crack is a plague of the inner cities in this country, and that's been especially true in Detroit.
The city, literally right in front of your eyes, was falling apart. It was chaos, and nobody knew how to handle it.
This chamber here holds 12 shotgun shells and everything.
As part of a 5-part series on the crack problem, I went on dozens and dozens and dozens of narcotics raids with a no crack task force. It was crazy. I mean, today you probably wouldn't get away with that.
Agents say the gang was well armed. In many of the homes, they found assault weapons.
It was very, very violent. We had officers shot, a couple of them killed, and I was right in the middle of it. I was on the drug squad for the FBI.
But in the course of some of these raids, they discovered a cache of videotapes. And this is one of the drug homes owned by the Chambers brothers, the notorious drug gang.
Money, money, money! We rich, goddammit! $150,000 cash.
They'd go through the homes, the faucets, 24 karat gold. Now this was amazing stuff.
Once upon a time, drug dealers was truly idolized. They had all the man toys that they wanted. Cars, planes, housing, weapons.
The money was just unlimited. And it becomes a problem because it's a cash business.
Should we throw these ones away, man, since we got $500,000?
What do you do with all that cash?
I'll tell you what we can do. We can give it to the poor. That's exactly what I say, too. We'll just donate those to the poor.
It seemed like every week a new drug gang emerged. The Chambers brothers, best friends.
Young Boys Incorporated, Maserati Rick, Johnny Curry and Leo Curry had started a drug organization.
Say, if I got a key of cocaine or 2 or 3 keys of cocaine, you might have 100 bales of weed. I make more off this cocaine than you do off the weed with less headaches. That's how I got into that game.
When we talk about Young Boys Incorporated or the Chambers brothers, there's not one single white person involved in any of those gangs.
During the coverage of the Chambers brothers, I had a conversation with a source or sources who said, there's this kid who's dealing cocaine. Richard Wershey Jr., he's 17. And he's white in a largely black-dominated world. And his nickname is White Boy Rick.
a teenage drug dealer nicknamed White Boy Rick.
White Boy Rick.
White Boy Rick.
His name is Richard Wershey Jr.
One of the things you don't want to do if you're a criminal, I would advise you never to get a nickname, and especially a really catchy nickname.
I just remember the name and the face. I recall me and my friends joking around when we were 16, 17 in the suburbs, and someone would be dealing weed out of his car, and we'd joke, "Oh, who do you think you are, White Boy Rick?"
In the 1990s, when I first entered the federal prison system, you hear about all the different street legends from the different cities. I was mainly on the East Coast, but one of the guys, that there was a lot of talk about was White Boy Rick. And to me, I was kind of mesmerized because, being a white drug dealer myself in the suburbs and in colleges, I was like, who was this white kid, that was supposedly running all these black gangs and running the city of Detroit?
At that time, I really didn't know anything about White Boy Rick. I didn't know who Rick Wershey was. I just knew there was this caricature, almost like a comic book character, being splashed across the newspapers all the time.
He had to be at least 15, 16 years old when I met him, but he was smart.
He was socializing and doing business with the biggest drug dealers in Detroit.
We all bought motorcycles together, rode up to see my brother in prison together.
It became a very iconic moniker. It has been name dropped in Kid Rock songs.
Got more cash than White Boy Rick!
Johnny Curry would buy him a mink coat. They'd walk around with their twin mink coats. To integrate like he did, not everyone can do that. And my point is, he wasn't a poser. That's who he was. He was a product of his environment. He was a white kid that was brought up basically his whole life around all black people. A lot of the DPD that were working the Detroit drug scene at that time viewed Rick as a race traitor. They did not like the fact that he talked black, that he acted black, that he dated black women, and definitely didn't like 14 and 15-year-old kids rolling around in BMWs and flashing cash wads that equaled more than their entire paycheck for that whole year.
$500,000 a week, $2 million a month.
It bred a lot of resentment.
There were sections of the city in the mid-'80s that were war zones.
This drug operation was so heavily fortified that police could not get through the front door.
In Detroit in the 1980s, there were dozens upon dozens of proficient professional killers. The most menacing, the most feared was without question Nate Boone Kraft.
In the 80s, I was a hitman that worked for many different drug lords and kingpins, even some that wasn't even in this country.
Law officers say there are direct links now between gangs and Colombian drug dealers.
They would hire me to do hits. I was involved with about 30 murders. I was responsible for almost 30 murders. They paid $50,000 and up. And I was looking to gain anything that was $50,000. I always, come on with it. What you want? The guy head? You want his arm? You want his private part?
Rice was in charge of the Detroit Police Department's homicide division.
Crack cocaine changed the whole complexion of homicide cases in the city of Detroit. We were actually having almost 800 homicides per year.
Probably 85% was due in some part to the narcotics trade.
Now this is what happened to you when you become a gangster, a hitman, or whatever. You get shot up.
Either you didn't pay what you owe me, or jealousy takes over.
Leg tore up. I had to walk with a cane. AK, I can't even move my hands. Shotgun blast. They hit me with everything, 9 in the back. I'm like the Grim Reaper. You make my list, I'm coming for you, whether you're good or bad.
White people have left this city in record numbers.
It goes from almost 2 million people, now it's down to 1 million people. Today, we're probably down to 600,000 people.
Rick grew up on the east side of Detroit, which is a notoriously very tough area.
We were very normal. We were a normal family coming up. My grandparents lived across the street from us, and it was my brother and my dad and I. And
Rick's father and I divorced when Rick was 5, and they stayed with him at the house, which I wasn't happy about, but they wanted to be there, so I left them.
It went, from a nice working class neighborhood, regardless of race or color, to just horrible. Like, there was crack houses across the street from our house. My grandmother, I remember her getting robbed for her purse in her own driveway. I mean, it was bad.
He played Little League Baseball, was the star of his Little League Baseball team, a pitcher. Eventually he went out and spent his 8th grade year out in the suburbs in Macomb County with his mom. He did really well out there. He got good grades, he was popular in the school.
But he was seeing his father on occasion, and he decided to go back with him.
Richard Sr. was a gun dealer, street hustler.
And the joke became, that there was white dad Rick and white boy Rick.
Rick himself really idolized his father and spent most of his childhood at his father's side, to the point where he was kind of known in those gun shows when he was 11, 12, 13 years old as like one of the best salesmen at those gun shows.
It was an adventurous life. I mean, it was cowboys and Indians in Detroit at that time, and he just got caught up in it.
Everything that I knew, that was like the glamorized version of White Boy Rick. Once I started talking to him and researching the case with all the documents and newspaper articles and court records, I found a very different story emerged.
1 out of every 5 people who try cocaine get hooked. But that's not your problem. Or is it?
What the legislatures tried to do was make the law so harsh that people would think twice before getting into the drug trade.
And we're going to pass a statute that provides for mandatory life. Anybody that was in possession of over 650 grams of cocaine, they got convicted, they got mandatory life.
Hundreds of people were prosecuted underneath the 650 law, including Tim Allen, the actor in Hollywood.
Well, historically, penalty has never been a factor in stopping a crime from occurring. As long as there's enough money in the crime, the penalty isn't going to make a big difference.
There was a lot of money to be made, and a lot of people tried to make money, and I represented quite a few of them.
And that kind of money began to corrupt everything. It corrupted the government. It corrupted the police.
There can be no progress in the suburbs unless there's progress in the city.
Coleman Young is the most powerful politician in the history of Detroit. Coleman Young was a machine, and his niece was Kathy Volson, and she was married to Johnny Curry, one of the biggest drug dealers in Detroit.
My wife's uncle was Mayor Coleman Young.
There was a protective detail that Coleman Young wanted placed on Kathy Volson, knowing full well that she was married and living with all these drug dealers.
And then she had heard about the Curry brothers and what we was into in our life, so we started dating. And then next thing you know, we was married.
I just find it crazy that he had a protection detail of police officers guarding his drug dealer niece.
Including Jimmy Harris, who was Mayor Coleman Young's head of security. They were specifically instructed not to intervene in these interactions and in these transactions.
One time I got picked up by one of the police officers. He knew I had something in the car. He seen it on the back seat. He said, go ahead on about your way. You want me to escort you in or something like that? So I was fine, because they really never messed with me too tough.
Their only job was to follow around Kathy Curry and prevent her from harm.
It was a slippery slope, I think, for these people. They went downhill very, very fast.
It was wide open for greedy people, and cops is just greedy as we are. If they got debts and so forth, they gonna turn crooks.
Every police officer down at 1300 was crooked. When I was down there, I walked through there like, shit, I had to badge myself.
Johnny Curry, because of his marriage to Kathy Curry, had a direct line to Gil Hill, who at the time was the Detroit Police Department's head of the homicide division.
But Gil Hill had bigger aspirations. He had become a movie actor, was in this wildly popular Eddie Murphy movie, Beverly Hills Cop, where he played the boss of Eddie Murphy in the movie.
Inspector T, how you doing? Where the f*** you been, Foley?
In Detroit, everybody knew Gil Hill and wanted to talk to Gil Hill and be around Gil Hill. He was probably the biggest celebrity in the city of Detroit at the time.
Gil Hill to me was a lot more than the Beverly Hills Cop that you see on TV. He actually trained me. He actually taught me the ins and outs of investigations and interrogations.
Was Gil Hill affiliated with the drug world?
Affiliated? Yeah, he was affiliated. He basically got us to stay away from certain people that he wanted to protect. He tell us, hey man, don't be hitting this one, don't do this and that. Because if you made our list, you was gonna be killed.
I have nothing bad to say about Gil Hill. He wanted homicides closed, and he wanted to give some resolve to the brutality of taking another person's life.
So you're telling me that the head of homicide came to you and asked who you got on your hit list?
Yeah, Gil? As Gil would say, everybody else on your list, I don't give a fuck.
That's not the Gil Hill that I know. That doesn't mean that, of course, people don't have dark sides, because I too believe that all people have dark sides.
So we would have to listen to Gil because he gonna do us a favor later. In order for us to get favors from him, we gotta do favors for him as well. One hand washes the other.
He was a guy with quite a bit of cachet. He had his eyes set on the mayor's office himself. I think he viewed himself as Coleman Young's successor.
One of the nation's best-known mayors, Coleman Young of Detroit, is getting a kind of national attention these days that no politician wants.
Coleman Young was a notoriously corrupt mayor that never got convicted or indicted.
The latest involves charges that his police chief stole from a fund set up for undercover drug buys.
And who the you think you are to come in here and cross-examine me?
He drew enormous animosity from a number of white residents who blamed him for great social ills. And I know a number of people, including a number of federal and local law enforcement figures, thought that he was steeped totally in corruption. I don't buy that. I think there were people around him who were.
So lots of members of federal law enforcement had a giant agenda to go get Coleman Young and try to tie parts of his administration into the Curry organization.
Johnny and Leo Curry were convicted and did a plea agreement for 20 years.
I did 14 years. I got a 20-year sentence, I did 14, came out.
And one day, I get a tip that they're going to raid Cathy Volson Curry's townhouse. The feds go in there, and guess who's in there, in bed with Cathy Volson Curry? Richard Wershe Jr. Imagine my editors asking me, what have you got going today? I said, well, an alleged notorious 17-year-old drug dealer was caught in a raid sleeping with the niece of the mayor on a Friday afternoon. That's a bad day for the mayor's office.
You had race, you had drugs, you had sex, you had political intrigue, you had police corruption.
So now Rick Wershe is dating Coleman Young's niece. And that's a problem for Coleman Young, and it becomes a problem for Rick Wershe.
Wershe was busted for possessing 8 kilos of cocaine, the charge which now has him serving a life sentence.
You're not trying to tell me that you're an angel, that you never did anything wrong, are you?
I've been involved in wrongdoing, but I don't feel I did anything to receive a life sentence.
The 650 lifer law that Wershe was convicted under was repealed in 1998.
So the Supreme Court of the state of Michigan said that constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, so you can't sentence people to life without parole for a nonviolent crime.
But to be incarcerated for 28 years, he's now a grandfather.
And everybody kind of recognized it was a fool's errand from the beginning. Just like almost all tough on crime things turn out to be a fool's errand. Until the law was changed, I don't think they caught not one large-scale drug dealer.
Were you ever a cocaine kingpin?
And then in the press, they come out and say, drug kingpin, white boy Rick. Kingpin of what? Who?
He didn't have a drug gang. He didn't have crack houses.
You ever kill anyone?
No.
Ever order anyone killed?
No.
I'm sorry to tell you that the legend of white boy Rick is just not true.
Why would a juvenile, nonviolent drug offender be kept in prison beyond 29 years?
I did way more than he could possibly have done to get that kind of a sentence.
Third world countries don't incarcerate like this.
How does a 16 or 17-year-old kid, Richard Wershe Jr., how does he get connected to the Curry family?
Here's the truth. At the age of 14, I was recruited by the FBI to become an informant.
It's a convoluted story. So when I met Richard Wershe Sr., he had been opened up as an informant and operated for a period of time by 2 other agents. He was a gun dealer, he was an entrepreneur.
There was no end to what he was doing. If he was in one thing, he was always dabbling in the next. But he was very brilliant. He invented a lot of things, and I think he probably held more patents than anyone in the state of Michigan.
I think he also had a business where he would illegally sell guns on the black market, help people get permits.
He even sold silencers. He could get you anything. He could get you grenades.
And then, kind of playing both ends of the game, he would then divulge who he was selling these guns to the FBI. At the top of the list of their targets is Johnny Curry and the Curry Gang.
So the first time I met Wershe Sr., it was at a McDonald's on the west side of Detroit. And when I walked into the restaurant and after introductions were made, I noticed he's got this young kid with him, appeared to me to be 15 or so. And when we got talking about the Curry drug investigation, I noticed the father would defer to the son.
My dad didn't really know who these people were.
And pretty soon it became apparent to me that really the kid is somehow the real source of the information.
And I kind of interjected and told them who they were and recognized them from the neighborhood.
I just didn't feel comfortable with it. I didn't think it was appropriate. But I wanted to keep the channels of communication open.
I believe Richard himself quickly realized that the target for this was big game.
He was using his son to get paid. It's not the role of a father to do something like that.
And this was something that I think started off as one thing and ended as another thing. Started off where they would, sometimes pick Rick up and they'd drive him through the neighborhood. They say, Rick, tell us who this guy is. Tell us what that spot is. What's that spot?
So here's this 14-year-old kid getting paid money to inform on narcotics dealers in the city of Detroit. In the short time he was an informant for the police, he collected about $35,000 from law enforcement.
I went shopping, I bought stuff, I bought a car when I was 15 years old.
It's funny to me how people always talk about what criminals will do to make a dollar. But in the same regard, you got to look at what the FBI will do to make an arrest.
He was actually instructed to infiltrate the Curry Boys gang and start hanging out with the Currys, pretending that you want to learn the drug game to start making controlled buys.
We had started letting him do a little errands, and then he started knowing a few people that you figure you buy it from the white boys, so the dope is good or whatever, so he started doing his thing. He didn't play really a major role. Nobody would mess with him though because they knew it was coming from us. So,
within a couple months, Rick is right by Johnny Curry's side and has become a protege of Johnny Curry's. I don't think anybody realized that Rick would be able to do that, let alone do it so quickly.
And were they able to make any arrests off your information?
Oh yeah, numerous.
Go, 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 go! Ready, police!
When Rick would say, hey, the dope's coming to this house, the dope would come to that house. The police would make a raid, they would confiscate the drugs and money, and they would be successful.
Yeah, I believe in one time in '85, I think it's 11 or 13 in one day.
The whole business of operating informants, it's a cat and mouse game. And just because somebody has an informant designated as the handler for the informant doesn't preclude that informant from being utilized by other agencies, such as Detroit Police Department.
We had DEA involved, the FBI involved. We had United States Customs, Michigan State Police. We had Detroit Police.
That's actually what was going on. Detroit Police Department officers were also using this kid in undercover capacity, using him to make buys, undercover buys.
He's going in unmarked police cars at night with the police, driving around, identifying people at certain clubs, and he ain't getting home till 3 in the morning, and he's got to wake up at 7 to go to school.
I mean, they weren't saying, oh, quit school, but they were saying, you know, we need you to do this. And I'd say, well, I got school tomorrow. And they said, so what? We still, you know, go down to this club for us.
You're wasting too much time in math class. You need to be on the street for us, getting us information. At some point, as the fall progressed of 1984, Johnny Curry was given information that Rick Wershe was an informant.
Rick Wershe was giving the feds information and people were getting busted. So they knew somebody was leaking information, and they would have meetings talking about who the informant might be.
There are a lot of people on the street that believe that Johnny Curry ordered Rick Wershe's murder.
So I remember being at the home that my boyfriend and I shared, and he said, here comes your dad. And I said, tell him I'm not here. And I was standing in the bedroom listening to him talk to my dad at the front door, and my dad said, tell her brother's been shot. And right then I fell to the floor. I got in the car with my dad and we went to the hospital.
Rick was with another Curry lieutenant who was a couple years older than him.
We were in the house approximately 5 minutes. We were both skipping school that day. He went upstairs.
And after a couple minutes, says, hey, Rick, come over here, come to the stairs.
As soon as I hit the top of the stairs, he comes out of the bedroom, shoots me in the stomach.
He was shot at close range with a .357 Magnum, went in the front, out the back, blew his large intestine in half.
I believe I rolled down the stairs. I was asking him to call 911. He wouldn't call 911. He was in a panic. By the grace of God, his girlfriend walked in the house, and she's the one that called 911. The guy that shot me, his older brother and a friend of his were putting me in their car. I don't know if they were going to take me to a hospital or take me somewhere and dump me. Finally, an ambulance showed up and blocked them off and told them to give me to them. And basically, that ambulance ride saved my life.
I had nothing to do with his getting shot. If an agent said it or whoever said it, the police officer, whoever said it, they way out of order then.
Rick's family and the task force all arrive in the waiting room of the hospital. There's a physical altercation between Richard and the FBI handlers. Richard blames them for getting his son shot, and at that time, thinking he might die. The task force were kind of huddled by the snack machines. They had realized that if he died, the fact that they'd been using a 14-year-old kid to infiltrate drug gangs was going to come to the surface, and it would be a scandal of all scandals.
The surgeon, Dr. Bowles, that performed surgery and saved Rick's life, sat next to his bedside, I believe it was for 10 or 12 hours, because he didn't think he was going to make it.
But he did, thank God.
I really honestly believe this is a turning point, because you could have pumped the brakes. You could have said, you know what, this is crazy. We almost got this kid killed. We need to stop everything right now and just do this, you know, by the book. But instead, members of that task force came to the conclusion that this would increase his credibility.
The police told me to say the shooting was an accident because it was the best way to sweep it under the rug, and I could continue to work for them if I said it was an accident.
We're going to push it into high gear. We're going to send him back into the Curry gang, and if there was any belief that he was an informant before, that belief was going to go out the window, because if he was a snitch, Johnny Curry would be in handcuffs right now.
So by the mere fact of him going back to his old neighborhood, it built up his reputation as a drug dealer, not an informant. It almost helped him in that regard.
During Rick's recovery, Johnny Curry called him and, you know, said, well, you know, where you been? What's going on? Eventually, Rick met him and was kind of like, confronted him. You thought I was an informant, you had me shot. And Johnny denied it.
Now, he might have mentioned it. I don't know. I had nothing to do with it.
But from that point forward, Rick was in tighter than ever.
I
And we are live from Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, where Top Rank presents World Championship Boxing.
Johnny Curry and his entourage had gone to Las Vegas to the Hearns-Hagler fight.
Fighting out of Detroit, Michigan.
Tommy Hearns, who was Detroit's favorite son in the boxing game at that time, was facing off against Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And all of the major urban drug dealers in Detroit went to the fight.
And this was the golden era of boxing. The Tommy Hearns-Marvin Hagler fight was all anybody was talking about in sports.
And Tommy Hearns grew up and socialized with a lot of the black drug dealers of the era. And the kind of joke was, last guy in Detroit, turn off the lights.
I was asked to go out there and get information about some people that were involved in the drug trade and their connections and how the drugs were coming in, and just basically as much intel as I could from out there. I was given a fake ID. I was 15 at the time. The ID made me 21 years old.
So they give him money, they give him false ID, and they set him up at a casino. This is insanity.
There's an FBI report detailing that, and it shows, I think they gave me like $1,500 on a receipt, and then I think they gave me like another $1,000 or $1,500 for pocket money.
While they're at the fight, Johnny Curry and his entourage's reservations and fight tickets mysteriously disappear. Well, maybe disappear is the wrong word. They never really existed to start. Johnny had reached out to a member of his crew by a guy by the name of Leon Lucas, and him and Johnny had kind of gotten into a beef over drugs and money that had been confiscated in a raid. Johnny Curry held him responsible for the drugs and money. So Leon said, let me start to try to make it up for you. I will provide you hotel arrangements and tickets for the Hagler-Hearns fight.
He assured Johnny Curry that it would all be taken care of. Well, when Curry and his posse got out there, nothing was handled, nothing was taken care of. And when he got back to Detroit, some of his lieutenants, not at the direction of Johnny Curry himself, but some of his lieutenants went over to Leon Lucas's house in an effort to intimidate him.
What those individuals that went there decided to do was to shoot the place up in a drive-by shooting.
Unfortunately for them, Leon Lucas isn't there.
Emergency central responded. I just got a bomb, please. My brother is so down, please. I don't know my dispatcher brother. Yes, I don't know what to do. You're not moving, please. Okay, they're coming.
And in the process, Leon's nephew, Damian Lucas, who was 13 years old and was living with him, was shot and killed.
And this becomes a very hot topic in law enforcement, on the news, 13-year-old killed in drive-by.
You know, I heard Johnny Curry on wiretaps shortly after we got the authority to tap his phone. And he was lamenting whoever he was talking with, that, you know, those guys shouldn't have gone over there. I told them don't go over there. He was sorry that this whole thing had taken place, probably because it was bringing a lot of heat on him and his drug organization.
Rick Wershey comes back into play in this whole story, in that Rick says he was listening in on a phone conversation over a speakerphone, and he heard Johnny Curry talking to Gil Hill.
And that's when I found out that Gil Hill was responsible for covering up the kid's murder. Johnny placed a call to Gil, put it on speaker. We were riding around in Johnny's BMW. Basically, Gil told him everything that was going on, and, you know, that he had it under control and that he would be in touch, not to worry about anything. He had already been to meet with Gil, and he said he gave Gil 10 grand to cover up the kid's murder.
This information made him incredibly dangerous to a lot of people.
Johnny Curry told this to me while he was incarcerated at the Texarkana Federal Correctional Facility in Texas.
So ultimately what happened is the Detroit Police Department, under the direction of Gil Hill, framed basically an innocent man, Lakeith Davis. I had information, part of it was from Richard Wershey Jr., and part of it was from the wiretaps that we had that strongly suggested that they had the wrong guy locked up, and he's facing a life term.
Well, sometimes he'll tell us to put the gun in somebody's car, one of our enemies. And then he had the police pull up on him and say, wait, is that a gun hanging out under your seat? Because the people don't know that we done slipped a gun in that car. Same way we did with drugs. He used to tell us to set people up with drug busts too. That's the way they get buses.
Subsequently, I was ordered by my special agent in charge to gather all of the information that we had with regards to the Damian Lucas murder and take it directly to Chief Hart of the Detroit Police Department. I did so, and nothing ever occurred. To this day, it's still an open investigation.
And in fact, Lakeisha Davis remained in jail, was facing a trial. And so I made sure Davis's defense attorney got the information that he needed to get him exonerated. Ultimately, that resulted in me being subpoenaed to state court, and where demands were met on me to reveal the source of the information. Well, it became very touch and go because there would be extreme retaliation against the Wershe family. So I refused to do it. And I was threatened with contempt of court. Ultimately, they dismissed the case against Lakeisha Davis, and they freed him at that point.
And Gil Hill was investigated for his role in taking a possible payoff and possibly burying these charges. He was never charged. And when Gil Hill ran for mayor, this case came up and was a detriment to his campaign.
At that point, I didn't realize to what extent the corruption had spread throughout the police department.
When we did the raid on Kathy Volson Curry's house, which was in June of 1987, we found a laminated card exactly like this one, holding the personal and confidential information from Gil Hill and Jimmy Harris, which ended up being the beginning of all the rumors that we had heard with regards to the funneling of information from the Detroit Police Department to the Curry organization.
So was that uncommon for Kathy to have that kind of access?
She had access to anything she wanted.
Like what?
Police reports, surveillance reports, whatever you wanted.
On Johnny?
Johnny, myself, other people who needed the stuff.
So if she said to Sergeant Jimmy Harris, I need to know what the narcotics cops are doing on Rick, on Johnny, on anybody else, he would flip them to her.
No problem.
The matter of the Damian Lucas murder was never resolved. I knew who did it, but proving it is something else.
Truthfully, I wish I never would have got roped into the Damian Lucas thing, because I didn't know 30 years later it would still be affecting my life.
Well, I was told to kill white boy Rick. We heard that he was telling. So they said, we got to kill that white boy.
My career is finished, but I promise you, I won't go down alone.
I know after he did Beverly Hills Cops and all that, he was trying to stay away from everybody. But he would meet you somewhere as long as he felt he was safe. Like he'd meet you out at the island, the waterfront. But yeah, he said that basically he wanted us to make sure that we kill white boy Rick. Make sure that boy's dead. But we got to make sure that it don't lead back to no one. I said, well, you know me, all my hits don't lead back to no one.
Rick had gotten deeper and had risen higher than anyone ever thought he could.
At some point, these guys said, sooner or later, something's going to go bad, and we're going to be held accountable.
They don't debrief him. They don't send him to a boarding school where he can get over what they've just subjected him to. They turn him loose on the streets.
It wasn't like they ever said, Rick, stop selling drugs. Rick, stop buying drugs. One day, they just never called again. And that's how we broke ties.
He wasn't going to go back to school. He knew the drug trade, so he became a drug dealer.
I became addicted to the lifestyle. I became addicted to the money. I became addicted to the women. I became addicted to that life.
The only difference was, he wasn't getting a government stipend. They had gleaned enough information and intelligence from him regarding the Curry gang that the indictment was on the horizon. The indictment would drop within a couple months.
Rick will tell you that it wasn't the smartest thing to do to date the wife of a man you put in prison or helped put in prison, but it happened.
I still don't hold nothing against that. She was getting high. I mean, what can you say? So,
I was a 17-year-old kid. I was having fun. To be honest, dating her back then was like dating a movie star or something.
I remember one time, back in those days, I had a 63 black Corvette convertible with red interior. And I'm driving it downtown. Who comes driving by? Rick Wershe and his friends. And I forget what kind of car, but it was relatively new and nice. Hey Chris, what's going on? Just speeding off. He was enjoying the celebrity moment. He was a kid, and he was famous for all the wrong reasons, but he was living the life.
But I knew that was white boy Rick driving. So we followed him. I speeded up, trying to get to him.
Me and Roy were sitting at a stoplight in a car, and I happened to look over my shoulder and I seen a van pulling up, and I saw the door sliding. It was like cracked open. And I told Roy, I said, Roy, run the light.
We stopped, that side door flew open, Bruce sitting in the chair. Man, hand me another gun. I said, we better reach up in this. By that time, they done speeded off.
I mean, they got shots off. The car was hit.
That's the only reason why he was still alive. The Mac jammed on us.
I had friends that were murdered. To be honest, you're a kid and you don't realize every day that you were playing with fire, that you could walk out your door one day and your life would be over.
And in that period of time, he became what is known as a weight man. As a weight man, he had a line of credit with some drug importers in Miami.
He brought a lot of drugs into Detroit in a very short period of time. He was not a drug dealer for very long, but he was nowhere near the big-time drug dealers.
From a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 10. I say he was about a 2. Rick was nowhere near me.
Guys like the Chambers or guys like the Currys, they controlled whole sections of the city. Rick didn't control anything.
And I used to say, where is they getting this stuff from? I guess it's Chris Hansen guy, I don't know.
I never set out to make Rick look like a bigger drug dealer than he was. Were there some exaggerations? Perhaps.
There were seeds of truth to what they were saying. He was socializing with all of the major players, so it was hard for the media to divorce that.
You know, whether he was a drug kingpin, a drug lord, a drug prince, a drug prodigy, he was a 17-year-old kid dealing multi-kilos of dope, and very few adults do that.
Rick couldn't deal with a lot of people that I dealt with. Rick could even see them.
Johnny and his brother and his people, they were grown men. These are grown men. And this was a kid, that's the difference. A 17-year-old white kid, it was impossible for him to have been what people have pretended that he was.
It wasn't like I went out and said, I want to become this big drug dealer and want everyone in the state of Michigan to know me. I was led down this path by law enforcement. I think about every day if I would have walked away. I was a kid. I was stupid.
So when you look at it at the end of the day, you know, law enforcement created almost the perfect criminal. And law enforcement created the perfect persona, the perfect character for the local news, for the local media, and they ate it up.
I covered it a lot. Rick will say I had him on TV every day. Obviously that's not true. He's saying that to make a point.
They convicted me through the media, through the papers. I was the public enemy #1, and they said stuff that was totally untrue.
Were there stories about him ordering hits on people that weren't true floating around? Absolutely, I heard them. But they never prosecuted him for it.
My grandfather, who was a judge in Detroit at the time of Mr. Wershe's case, had presided over his case for a brief period of time, and he called him worse than a mass murderer and gave him a $1 million bond. It was the highest bond my grandfather had ever set for any defendant.
If you have so much evidence that he's been involved in a drug hit, bring a case. If not, rumors don't count in court.
On May 23, 1987, Rick Wershey and a man named Roy Grissom were arrested driving down Hampshire near Dickerson.
It ended with his arrest, which is kind of an interesting story because it was probably a setup.
Rick, at this point, has hooked up with 2 Colombian wholesale cocaine dealers in Miami. They would send kilos up to Detroit in trailers. He got a shipment, I believe it was an 18-kilo shipment.
They drop off 10 kilos of cocaine to a customer, and they have a pile of cash in the car.
And they passed a police car that was just on routine traffic duty. And I believe he actually waved at the police officer because he knew him.
They're driving home, they get pulled over, allegedly for going through a stop sign.
At this point, there's a bunch of people on the porch, including Rick's sister, Dawn.
And we watched it all unfold.
He said, "Okay, guys, what's going on?" And they said, "You're under arrest." And he said, "For what?" And they said, "Possession of drugs." And he told them, "I don't have any drugs." And they said, "They're in the car." He said, "Search it."
One of the police officers reaches into the back of the car and pulls out the bag with the cash.
So my dad ran out there and grabbed the bag of money.
Officers say a tussle started, a fight almost, between Wershey, Grissom, and the officers. Investigators say that Wershey took off running.
About 25 minutes, a half hour later, the police find him and they roughed him up pretty good, to the point where he had to go to the hospital. For the next 3 or 4 hours, the police are combing the neighborhood, looking for drugs. They got an anonymous tip.
Later, more police arrived, and eventually they found a box containing 8 kilos of cocaine under this back porch a block away from the traffic stop.
I was responsible for those drugs. I had to pay the people in Miami for those drugs.
Rick believes that it was a setup, that they were watching him and they knew he would have drugs or money. And they say that when he ran out of the car, he hid the cocaine underneath a porch and continued to run away. And he's charged with that crime.
The attorney that was representing him at the time was an attorney by the name of William Buffalino, and he brought motions to suppress the evidence. Shortly thereafter, Coleman Young's niece told Rick, "Everything will be okay, but you need to get different attorneys."
They decided that they needed an African-American attorney, that it would look better to the jury.
Hire Ed Bell and Sam Gardner, and everything will be okay.
When they went forward, they changed their strategy. They decided not to heavily pursue the idea that these drugs were not Rick's.
Fatal mistake.
Sam Gardner was Coleman Young's lawyer at the time, and the only reason they were brought in was to watch me. It wasn't to help me.
Basically, every time I went to see him, he just told me I had nothing to worry about. Things were looking good. I was told at one time that I wouldn't go to trial. He didn't think that we would go to trial.
Before they went to trial, his trial attorneys agreed to withdraw all the pretrial motions. They agreed not to admit any evidence in front of the jury that he had been working for the government since he was 14. So the jury never heard that.
Basically, I think the fix was in, and Coleman didn't want me on the streets anymore. So them being my attorneys, I think they tanked the case.
I think it was like a whirlwind that just kind of swept him up, because the phone conversation I remember having with him, he was kind of baffled by his notoriety. And then that time when I saw him, you know, he's waiting on his jury and all these assholes are around him. All of them wanted him to be convicted, I'm sure. That's why they showed up.
Rick took the nickname and ran with it. I mean, he didn't have to wear the fur coats. He didn't have to show up at trial with a whole crew of little kids wearing beepers and gold chains. He came to court like a drug dealer.
I said, "Rick, if those jurors see all these little crooks running around with you, you're dead."
We was told to show up down there with our expensive cars, jewelry, and just get in front of the news. These all his workers. Kingpin is on trial, drug lord is on trial, and his friends down here trying to free him.
Of course it hurt him. There's no doubt about it, it hurt him.
Certain police officers paid us to do that. Ain't nobody ever heard of him being no drug lord until they print that shit in the paper. Where the hell was he a kingpin of? Us blacks? Oh, hell no. We made it seem like that, but he wasn't.
They have this newspaper article where they actually listed him as the leader of the Best Friends gang.
which is crazy. You know, the Best Friends were like this hit gang that had over 100 murders. It's just incredible and crazy.
We had to rely on law enforcement. We saw the documents, we saw them firsthand. They were shared with us, and we did our best to vet them, but we were certainly not making stuff up or fabricating, because there was enough going on to keep us all busy with crazy enough stories. You had characters like Maserati Rick, who survived an assassination attempt and then was murdered in his hospital bed, and in the nightstand was a pistol and a crucifix and rosary beads. He was buried in a Mercedes-Benz coffin, so you didn't have to make stuff up. But that's how the cops had it set up, and that's how they listed him, and that's how we reported it, and that's how we sourced it in the story and the graphic illustrations, that this was based on law enforcement documents and sources.
It was a political move. That's where they could put him away forever.
Nate was showing up down there, which we saw Nate there, to try and do some harm to me.
I was trying to shoot him out at the courthouse. We had the van already parked up on Gracia. I already had the scope and everything scoped in. But at that point, they walked him underneath into the courthouse. What you mean he in the courtroom? They said, yeah, he in the courtroom.
Of course, we were a little more careful, and when we left the courthouse or where we parked the car or whatever, he wasn't there to wish me well at trial.
And he was convicted, and after that, it was easy. You're going to jail, you're never going to see the light of day.
This operation was called Operation Backbone. And the reason I named it Backbone, I figured you need some backbone to work this case, you know. At that time, it was the most significant police corruption investigation in the state of Michigan. The objective was, I knew through the Curry investigation and the Damian Lucas homicide that that investigation was partly compromised, and I knew that there were corrupt police officers involved in this thing. So that was the objective, to get these corrupt cops.
And he called out of the blue, and I said, what's going on, Rick? He said, well, the FBI is here, and they want me to help them. They've said that they will help me if I help them.
But if you cooperate on this undercover project and everything works fine, the best I can do is maybe take you out of state custody and put you in the Federal Witness Protection Program in a federal facility with other informants. And it might just be a better situation. And if you ever become eligible for parole, I'll come back and testify for you. I'll tell them what you did. He said, you know what? We shook hands, and that was the agreement we made.
And the feds, during that time, were chasing Coleman Young hard. They wanted to bring down the mayor of Detroit.
The FBI wanted to use my relationship with Kathy to target the mayor as well as police corruption within the city of Detroit. They were targeting Willie Volson. He was married to the mayor's sister. He was Kathy's father, of course, and everyone knew that Willie had pull throughout the city of Detroit. The other target of the operation was Jimmy Harris. He was a high-ranking Detroit police official. He did whatever Mayor Young told him to do. He covered up things that the mayor's family did. To my knowledge, for the right price, they were willing to protect drug shipments from anywhere. I mean, if it was in the city of Detroit and they could make a buck off of it, they were willing to provide that police protection.
So I got Rick Wershey's sister, Dawn, to cooperate with me as well. And she had a relationship with Kathy. I had an agent by the name of Mike Castro, who had served extensively in the Caribbean and knew the Caribbean pretty well.
I introduced Mike Castro, who was the undercover FBI agent, to Kathy. He posed as my supplier from Miami. And me knowing Kathy and her family, how greedy they were, I knew Kathy would cut into him, and that's exactly what happened.
We arranged a dinner with Wershey's sister, Kathy Volson Curry, and Mike Castro, which I attended, but I was off to the side, and it was recorded. So during that conversation, Kathy was just enamored with the prospect of getting back into the cocaine business and so forth. Her eyes lit up. And at that point, she offered her police assistance.
So basically, we're businessmen, we're in the drug business.
We invited Willie Volson and James Harris down to Florida, had an undercover yacht, sat down there and on videotape and negotiated the deal.
We'd like to fly something in. We're gonna look like businessmen delivering packages. Okay. Only us and you will know it's drugs. No one else is gonna know anything.
Okay. We're gonna probably ship up in a plane around 100 keys.
You provide protection and protection from the police. You can handle that?
And what you're talking about is no problem.
Right.
I got 3 Detroit police officers myself. That's
okay. All right.
These people have been with me.
You can trust them. We'll have our equipment, our van or whatever, loaded up. Just like the money laundering operation, they escort us away from the airport, out in the highway, and sayonara.
For a successful mission and a good escape and all that, 40, 50 grand.
So we got a deal?
Yeah. Here we go.
Partners in crime, brother.
Here we go.
Willie and Kathy, along with Detroit Police Sergeant Jimmy Harris, were charged last month in an FBI corruption case alleging that police officers took payoffs to protect drug and drug money shipments coming into city and metro airports.
Any other mayor would have been glad to have corruption out of their police department, unless your brother-in-law is the head of the corruption. And then this guy goes on to call me a stool pigeon. That's like an old gangster term for a rat.
Did that put your life in danger, having Coleman Young call you a stool pigeon?
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
18 corrupt police officers and politicians, as a result of Wershe's direct involvement in this thing, went to prison. And without White Boy Rick, or Richard Wershe Jr., as I think he'd prefer to be called at this point, that never would have happened.
And they haven't even scratched the surface. The corruption runs so deep in there, it's a shame, man.
During the FBI investigation, Hill met with Harris, a longtime friend, Volson, and the undercover agent posing as the drug dealer.
Willie would constantly brag about his relationship with Gil Hill. And so toward the end of the operation, we wanted to see if he could actually set up an introduction to Gil Hill. And he did. We got wiretap authority to install wiretaps inside of Willie Volson's car. And we arranged it for both undercover agents to meet with Gil Hill and Willie Volson. And that happened. During that conversation, Mike Castro let it be known that he was a money launderer and they were drug dealers, that plainly. It was my thought that if Gil Hill wanted to get up and run out of that meeting, so be it. He's an innocent guy. But if he stayed, that meant something else. And not only did he stay, but he had a conversation, which was taped. And in that conversation, Gil Hill said he wanted to get money from Mike Castro. I got authorization to pay him the money, $20,000. The thing languished and it languished and it languished before the bureaucrats could make up their mind. When they finally made up their mind, the trail had cooled. I think Gil, at that point, being a smart guy, he smelled a rat and didn't take the bait. So we lost an opportunity.
But Hill refused to get involved. He says the entire probe smacks of entrapment.
It seems like this upset you tremendously.
Now, was he this major criminal mastermind? I don't think so. Was he a guy who played fast and loose and perhaps, and maybe have crossed the line a couple of times, but try as they might. And I know the feds who were chasing him, trying their damnedest, and these were solid, hard-working guys after him. They were not dogging him. If they could have caught him, they would have. They didn't.
Reporters were chasing Gil Hill down the street, asking him if he was involved in taking bribes. And that's very damaging if you want to be the next mayor of the city of Detroit.
Gil Hill ran for mayor and lost, but Gil Hill blames Rick for him not becoming the mayor.
I think helping the FBI with Operation Backbone was the biggest mistake of my life because it created enemies that I couldn't even imagine. I was a kid. I didn't think of the political aspects of it.
There's still a lot of angry people in the city of Detroit, in positions of power.
In Michigan, you're supposed to have an opportunity to have a parole hearing every 5 years. Rick Wershe has only had one parole hearing in 28 years in prison. That parole hearing was in 2003, and it was a spectacle.
When you're up for parole, what the parole board does is they send letters out to the original trial judge. In Rick's case, it was a judge by the name of Thomas Jackson, who's recently retired. And Judge Jackson wrote back and he said, I have no problem with this young man getting out. He's served a long time in jail. They then send a letter at the same time to the prosecuting attorney's office. The chief prosecutor was a fellow by the name of Michael Duggan. And Michael Duggan is now the mayor of the city of Detroit. The first response from that office was, "We have no problem with him getting out." 2 weeks later, another letter comes from that office saying, "Disregard the first letter, we don't want him out." In the letter, which was a multi-page letter, they were saying that Richard Wershe Jr. was responsible for the downfall of the city of Detroit.
Rick Wershe was involved in cases as a juvenile where the witnesses just disappeared, that this kid is so dangerous that he should never be let out of prison.
And it was signed by Michael Duggan. If you ask him today, he'll tell you he doesn't remember that letter and he didn't remember signing it. If you look at the letter, the name right underneath Michael Duggan is that of his chief assistant, Samuel Gardner. Rick's two defense attorneys at the time he was convicted was Samuel Gardner and Ed Bell, who were law partners.
He wanted to keep me in prison as long as he could. I mean, here's a guy that was my lawyer and was the #2 prosecutor, told me I had nothing to worry about, and then this letter that was so outlandish and crazy gets sent to the parole board. I think it proves that they threw the case from the beginning and that their ultimate goal was to keep me in prison.
So I went over to the hearing, and the first day of the hearing, I heard federal agents say that Rick Wershe was very helpful, instrumental in bringing down dirty cops and other drug dealers in Detroit, and that they believed he should be let out of prison, that he should be paroled. You come back the next day and it's a completely different story.
The Wayne County prosecuting attorney brings in 3 or 4 homicide detectives.
I was approached by Deputy Chief Dennis Richardson and was told that I was going to go to the parole hearing. The goal of the hearing was to make sure that he was not released, that Richard Wershe was considered to be dangerous.
They characterized him as Al Capone.
And they start detailing the collapse of the city.
And then I talked about, in generalities, the damage that drugs had did to the city of Detroit.
The story of all of the homicides and all of the drugs and all of the murders.
That was the extent of my contact with the parole board. But the other members of the police department and law enforcement that was there went into generalities also.
And if you read it, the transcript carefully, they just keep throwing Rick Wershe Jr.'s name in. They never say that he does this stuff.
It's fair that you could have implied that they knew about Richard Wershe because they slanted it to whereas he was to be considered dangerous when they didn't know anything at all about him.
They'd never even worked drugs, and some of them ended up in prison themselves.
In order to prepare for the parole hearing, I was given information to review and look at so that I can familiarize myself with Richard Wershe.
They went to the Detroit Free Press and said, we need to have all of the news articles with regards to Rick Wershe because we want to review a bunch of this information. Well, now we know that half of the stuff that's in print wasn't true at all. It was made up by the news media.
Listening to these police officers say that Rick Wershe was violent and dangerous and should not be let out of prison was hard-hitting, and it was powerful. It was powerful testimony.
You had some people that testified in favor of Rick Wershe, including Kid Rock, the musician.
Kid Rock did not show up with a big entourage. He came by himself. He drove himself to that hearing, and he told the parole board very plainly that this could have been me if the circumstances were different, and that Rick Wershe deserves to get out. And he quietly went away. But ultimately, the story didn't play out that way. The police jumped on the fact that Kid Rock was there, and they basically put out the storyline that, what, is white boy Rick going to get out of prison and go be a roadie for Kid Rock? There's a real recipe for success. Let's take this drug dealer and put him with a big-time rapper, and let's see how well he does. Let's see if he's really reformed. This is not going to work. And that played well. It played well with the public, and I think it played with the parole board.
And the result was they turned down his parole.
It was a sham. There was absolutely no reason for any of us to be there to try to prevent him from being released.
I voted to have Rick Wershe released. It made sense. There was no reason in this world that he should still be there.
This whole thing stinks to high heaven.
I think it goes back to Gil Hill. All roads lead back to him. I mean, there's someone or something that's keeping me in prison, and it's not the crime that I committed.
So a couple of years after the parole hearing, probably around 2005, Wershey Jr. Was, of course, in federal protective custody, witness protection program, doing his life sentence. I became aware that he was involved in a very minor way in an auto theft ring.
He became aware of the ability to obtain a car for his mother.
It consisted of him making some phone calls on behalf of the people that were actually involved in the auto theft ring.
When the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office found out, they made phone calls to the United States Attorney's Office down in Miami saying, you make sure he's indicted and the full extent of the law comes down on him.
I was told, you take a plea bargain or I'm going to arrest your mom and your sister. So what do? I took a plea bargain.
So he pled guilty and got a 5-year sentence. 99.9% of all other cases, the 5 years would run concurrently with the life sentence that he's under in Michigan. But because Rick's Rick, the sentence was ruled to run consecutively.
If and when he's released here, which I pray is soon, he has to go to Florida and finish out time.
And if you look at the guy's prison record, with the exception of that one incident, he is someone that is a model prisoner.
He has remained misconduct-free during his entire sentence with the MDOC, which started in February 5th, 1988. Mr. Wershey has maintained steady employment and has never been a management problem for staff. He has good communication skills and interacts well with staff and other inmates alike. In my opinion, that would show that Mr. Wershey was a model prisoner, and there's no reason that he should have been denied parole for so long.
Now, based on my reading of the briefs, all parties agree that defendant's original sentence of life without the possibility of parole for a juvenile who committed a nonviolent offense involving drugs was unconstitutional. The case law over the last decade has demanded that we treat juveniles constitutionally different than adults. That difference requires us to consider the defendant's age at the time the crime was committed. Where a defendant's sentence violates the Constitution, recent case law holds that the remedy for that violation is resentencing.
Suddenly in 2015, Judge Dana Hathaway decided that she wanted to resentence Rick Wershey, and it was a major decision.
He's stunned. I mean, you could see in the courtroom, he doesn't know where to go. I mean, he is just almost in shock.
We need him out. He's been in long enough.
I'm a bit overwhelmed because I've only seen my father in person maybe 2 or 3 times in my life, so it's a difficult relationship to know someone your whole life and not really.
They wouldn't even allow him out for my dad's funeral. When my dad was dying of cancer, we asked, and they said no, it's too high of a security risk.
I would like to spread my dad's ashes somewhere and visit my grandparents' grave.
I just want to see him, like I said, and spend time with him before I die.
My mother's not in good health. I mean, after 29 years, you don't hit the ground running, but I think I have a good support team.
He's supposed to get out, and if he doesn't get out, I want you news guys to be investigating as to who in the hell wants him in and who has that kind of power to keep him in.
Wershey will be back here in 2 weeks to hear the judge's sentence. If it is the time served, it's possible he could walk out of here a free man. It would definitely mean that his time as a prisoner is near its end.
Kim Worthy objected to that. She's a prosecutor in Wayne County. In 2015, she said, we believe the law says that Rick Wershey must stay in prison until the parole board releases him.
So as it stands right now, Rick Wershey will not be resentenced.
When Prosecutor Worthy objected to my resentencing, I was disappointed. I didn't think that there was a legitimate basis for it. And then when the Court of Appeals sided with the prosecutor, I was disappointed again. I thought that my opinion had strong legal footing, given the fact that his sentence was ultimately an Eighth Amendment violation, and I thought that the remedy should have been resentencing.
Oh, I'm disappointed. I mean, let down a little bit, but I expected it, to be honest with you. After all this time in here, you don't believe you're going to get out of here until the day you walk out of here.
Kim Worthy is one of the main people standing in his way of becoming a free man. And she's made no public statement over the years. She's never given any indication why she's so dead set on Rick Wershe staying in prison. I've done dozens of stories on the injustice of Rick Wershe still being in prison. And I've truly felt that the stories I've done should have been enough for people to do the right thing, but that hasn't happened.
His sentence shocks the conscience. How long he was in shocks the conscience. I'm not saying he was innocent, but part of our job is letting the punishment fit the crime. And here it absolutely did not. For a juvenile defendant to never have his age taken into consideration was highly inappropriate and inconsistent with the case law that's been evolving for the past decade.
He's a juvenile, nonviolent offender who's served 29 years. He should be out.
He is a political prisoner. He's being held against his will by the politicians of Michigan for crimes he never did.
There is a relationship between the current Wayne County prosecutor and Gil Hill.
From what I saw, Kim Worthy and Gil Hill had a professional political relationship.
She and Gil Hill worked together, especially when he was in city council, so they have a long history. So I think that's where the issue is.
Well, the city lost a good one today. Gilbert Hill, or Gil as we knew him, died today peacefully with family by his side. He was a legendary homicide detective in Detroit and, of course, landed the role of Eddie Murphy's foul-mouthed boss in Beverly Hills Cop.
Two huge stories today. First, this statement from Kim Worthy that she gave exclusively to the defenders. Kim Worthy saying she is going to reconsider her stance. She may no longer object to Wershe being locked up. This decision by Kim Worthy coming the very same day that a hitman says he was hired by a police officer to kill Rick Wershe back in the 80s.
Maybe they need to step down and let the boy out before I start really naming names and they know who they are.
In that documentary, I'm told that Nate Kraft is going to say that former Mayor Coleman Young and former City Council President Gil Hill went to great lengths to make sure that white boy Rick Wershe would stay in prison for the rest of his life.
So finally, after all this time, Kim Worthy says she's not going to stand in Rick Wershe's way, but she's not going to do anything to help him either. She's going to leave that up to the parole board.
Well, that's the problem, is the parole board. They believe whoever is sitting there talking to them, and they never ask any questions. They just listen to it all, and then they vote, and half the time they've listened to the wrong information.
The Supreme Court in the state of Michigan needs to take a look at this, or the governor needs to pardon him.
Every time I've called the governor's office, I've been told by his Office of General Counsel that the governor doesn't get involved in any of the parole instances. He turns it over to the parole board.
Think about that concept. These are unelected people that are on the board. They're just regular people, and they're appointed by the governor. And you, as the governor of the state of Michigan, that get elected by the citizens, you're going to say, oh, what do you want me to do? The parole board says they shouldn't do anything. That's crazy.
I think people in Michigan are finally realizing that this story is not going away and it's not staying local. It's going to get bigger, it's going to get national, it's going to get international, and someone's going to have to answer as to why Rick Wershe is still in prison, because nobody has answered for that yet.
This is the Klaus von Bülow case that I was the appellate lawyer, and you don't get too many cases where the reversal of the conviction makes the front page of the New York Times.
Attorney Alan Dershowitz has an office full of memories from the big cases. O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Patty Hearst, Jim Baker. He can't see any reason Rick Wershe should still be behind bars.
This is a terrible, terrible injustice. This sentence has so many constitutional problems that one would hope a court would look at it very skeptically. One might at least have the hope that they will see the thing in context and say to themselves, oh my God, young man, drug offense, Look at how much time he spent. That doesn't make sense.
Alan Dershowitz has agreed to assist Rick Wershe's attorney, Ralph Muselli, saying an injustice like this needs as much public attention as possible.
Who's going to be the hero here and do the right thing?
I don't know that anyone can look at all the facts surrounding this case and not feel bad for him. And whether it's appropriate or not for me to say, I am still a human being, despite being the judge that just happened to inherit this case. I can't check that at the door. And I think part of my job is to have compassion for people and the people that come before me and to see all sides of the story. And I don't know how anyone can look at this and not feel bad for him.
I say Rick should have did 7, 8 years and been home. Should have been home 20 years ago. Even my daughters, everybody said, yeah, they should let the boy go. He didn't did enough time. Murderers, he did more time than murderers.
The leader of the Young Boys Incorporated, Butch Jones, the Henry Ford of heroin, as he liked to call himself, responsible for hundreds and hundreds of kilos of drugs being sold, responsible for multiple murders, alleged and convicted, did 7 years. Kurt McGirt was Butch Jones's protege, a 16-year-old hitman, did 25 years. He's out. The Curry Boys, Johnny Curry, Rick's mentor in the game, arguably the biggest East Side drug dealer of the 1980s, ran an empire for 10 years, went into prison in 1987, came out in 1999, 12 years. Nathaniel Boone Craft.
Here I am, hitman, murderer, however y'all want to put it.
Admitted to killing 30 people in open court. Did 17 years, he's out.
I'm not in prison no longer. I'm free. And hopefully one day, y'all will free white boy Rick.
What rational human being would say that a man who's admitted 30 execution-style killings, who then cooperates with law enforcement, should get out in 17 years, and Richard Wershe Jr. should be in for 28 years?
I know I'm going to hell. There's nothing I could do to change that because my life was so much violence, so much everything, but yet white boy Rick is still locked up.
The government takes a 14-year-old boy out of high school and places him in imminent peril so that they can do their job. And after they used him up, they kick him to the curb and send him to jail for the rest of his life.
He done served a lot of time for something that he wasn't. Bottom line, for something that he wasn't.
What happens if 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years down the road, Rick, you get out of prison? What do you do then?
Start my life over. Try and start from the beginning, you know. I want to go home, be able to raise my kids, have a family, get a job somewhere, man, lead a normal life.
Hello, I'm Kevin Dietz with a breaking news story. A decision is in on the Richard Wershe White Boy Rick case. The parole board has voted, and they have voted to parole Richard Wershe. He will be freed of his life sentence in prison in the state of Michigan.
Oh my God.
The administrative assistant came and called me in the office, and he basically told me, listen, it's over. You're done. Michigan paroled you.
And what'd you do?
I cried, man.